Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be taking a look at this little beauty here. That's right. This is the Alfaskop desktop M336SX, a small desktop computer from a little company called Nokia. Nokia Data to be exact. So in this video we're going to take a look at the exterior of this computer, including this rather exotic Nokia keyboard. We are going to be disassembling the entire computer, taking it completely apart. I'll give you an overview of all of the different components. We're going to look at some software which is installed and explore this rather boring or dull looking business desktop PC. But this is a Nokia PC, so my guess is you'll only get to see those once in a blue moon. So let's fire her up and see what she does. So we'll hit the power button and see what comes on screen. And we get the standard memory count. And then we get a message that there is no battery for CMOS clock RAM and the computer doesn't boot. It tries to find a floppy disk, but ultimately it doesn't boot, so we need to go into the BIOS and see what we can fix here. So obviously here we can set the date and time. The floppy drive is configured by default, but there is no hard disk drive configured. So we get a selection here. There's no auto detection. The only auto detection that we have is for a standard ST506 hard drive. But the hard drive which is inside this computer is a 43 megabyte hard drive from Connor. Just looking up the specs of this 1991 hard drive reveals us with the cylinders, heads, and sectors that we need in order to properly configure it into this BIOS, and it's type 17. So normally with this we should be able to boot. I'm going to take this opportunity to look at some other settings here. We have CPU speed, which is set to normal. We can also set it to auto and slow. We have some shadow options for the ROMs. We have, keyboard. We have a server mode, which we can enable or disable. Not really sure what that is. Serial parallel ports, passwords, startup, boot media, and a basic information screen. So here we can see that the BIOS is dated the 22nd of August of 1991, version 3.06. We can already see it's an 8386SX. There is no Math CoPro, and we have VGA color installed. So let's update the CMOS settings. It does the memory count again, and hopefully it will pick up the hard drive right now, and we can see what is on the hard drive and if the PC will boot. And indeed it does. So we have a Dutch version of MS-DOS, which is currently starting. It is testing the extended memory. It is loading up smart drive, loading a mouse driver, and then immediately boots into Microsoft Windows 3.1. Now this is a 40 megabyte hard drive, so I'm not expecting a whole lot of software to be installed on this machine. So let's take a quick look in Windows 3.1. Again, this is a Dutch version, so everything will be in Dutch for now. So let's open up the file manager, and yeah, it seems to be pretty basic. We have the DOS directory, which seems to include an MS-DOS 6 installation. We have a mouse driver, we have our Windows folder, and we have Word for Windows here, and that's basically it. Now it is always nice to see these old Microsoft Word versions started. So this is Microsoft Word version 6.0, and in this case registered to a company which I think was or is still active in the automotive parts business. But yeah, I'm not going to go into any personal files here. So it's a very basic Windows 3.1 installation with Microsoft Word installed, and that's basically it. So like I said, we have 8 megabytes of RAM. There is no networking, no sound installed. So this is a very business-oriented machine. I'm going to just run check disk. So we have our 42 or 43 megabytes of disk space. Also going to be running scan disk just to see what the state of the hard drive is. So usually, when you get a computer to boot like this, that usually means that the hard drive is okay, and I have relatively good success with these old hard drives in these old computers. I'm just going to do a surface scan anyway. I'm going to speed things up a little bit, but you know, as I was kind of expecting, it didn't found any issues, and hard drive seems to be in pretty good shape. But now let's focus on the hardware a little bit. And this is definitely a Nokia PC. As you have Nokia data stickers everywhere, which was the PC division of the Nokia Corporation. It was established somewhere in the beginning of the 1980s, but was eventually sold in 1991 to International Computers Limited. Now this computer is branded the Alfaskop Desktop M336SX, and Alfaskop was a brand from Sweden that focused on data terminals and IBM compatible PCs that was eventually bought in 1988 by Nokia. And they kind of kept that Alfaskop name. The division was very short-lived. They only made a handful of PCs before they eventually got sold. And the Alfaskop brand filed for bankruptcy in 2001. Now, quick disclaimer for the germophobes out there and those faint-hearted. We are going to be looking at a very dirty keyboard right now. I'm going to start with this Nokia data label. We have a whole bunch of function keys up until F24, which is a lot more than your, typical IBM PC compatible keyboard. This one goes all the way up to F24. It seems to be using this 120 key 3270 style IBM keyboard layout, which was typically used in like a terminal type of setting. Also on the left hand side of the keyboard, we have lots of different keys here with very specific functions. Where you would normally expect to see the function keys in, like, for example, a Model F keyboard. This here uses very dedicated keys for that. And you find these, different special keys all around the keyboard. So, we have these kind of tab-like keys here, and also where you normally find home and end and page down, we have a very specific set of keys as well. Numlock is pretty standard, except for a couple of, special keys as well. We also have 3 LEDs here, pretty standard: numlock, caps lock, and scroll lock. But all in all, a pretty funky looking keyboard. Now this particular keyboard uses one of these 5-pin DIN connectors, whereas the computer kind of expects a PS2 compatible keyboard. So that's a bit strange. Now on the front we have the Alfaskop Desktop M336SX. We have a 1.44 megabyte disk drive. We have room for another one, 2 LEDs, one for the hard drive, one for the power, and then we have the power button right here. Moving to the back, we have the power supply connector here on the left. We have a serial port, another serial port, and a parallel port. The labeling is a little bit off, so you need to use your imagination. We seem to be missing a part here. There is one screw that seems to hold the cover in. And on the back here, we have a keyboard and mouse connector, PS2. We have an LDU and CRT connector, which seem to be VGA connectors, and then 2 game ports. We also have the Nokia monitor here with a very specific early 90s look and feel. We have the power switch here on the right. Okay, so time to open the PC and see what we have inside. So we only have one screw to unscrew, and then the cover can come off like so. And let's look at the layout. We have the hard drive here, a Connor hard drive. We have a disk drive. The power supply seems to be located on the right here. We have a couple of expansion cards and the motherboard. So here on the right hand side we have the power supply. Seems to be some kind of heat sink thingy here. We have a sticker, Nokia branded, manufactured in the 3rd week of 1991. Here we have the power button, which feeds into the power supply. We also have a fan here, which is used to cool the power supply. Here we have the 3 expansion cards that we'll take a look at. And the first card that we see is a bit of a surprise because this appears to be some kind of joystick or game port interface card with 2 game ports, which is pretty odd for a business PC. Here we have the 16-bit ISA video card, Paradise, with 2 VGA connectors. So that's also interesting. And last but not least, we have the main expansion card, which is in fact the big part of the computer because it contains our Intel CPU, the 386SX20 MHz. It includes the RAM, it includes the chipset, the BIOS, the battery, the speaker. So yeah, this is one of those systems on a board where the actual motherboard is nothing more than a simple backplane where you can slot in additional ISA cards. So next thing I wanted to do was to remove the power supply unit from this PC. So it's held into place with 2 screws. And then we can just pull it out like so. And much to my surprise, what I thought originally was a heatsink is nothing more than a connector, which is used to connect this power supply unit to the motherboard. So they went with this type of connector, which kind of floats up into the air to make a connection with the power supply. And here we have the DC brushless fan that we should be able to pull out. But there's lots of plastics here on this computer and I wasn't really sure how to get that out. First thing I wanted to remove was that fan. There was this temperature sensor which was located here, which to my guess is used to determine the speed on which this fan should run. So once the temperature sensor and this little cable here on the motherboard is removed, we can get the fan out of the way. And the next thing is to get the hard drive out, which is mounted on this little plastic thing with lots of clips that can be used to remove the plastic part from the case. Just need to be very careful here because the power cables, for example, are soldered onto the motherboard directly, so there's no connector. So we need to make sure that everything is disconnected before we remove this plastic frame here, and then we can get a good view of the motherboard. First thing I'm going to do is try and get the hard drive out of this plastic frame, which was also a little bit challenging because there was an additional clip here which kind of holds the hard drive in place. So we gently need to move this and then kind of slide out the hard drive, which is again mounted on another plastic frame. So not really a big fan of these constructions. Same thing with the 1.44 megabyte disk drive. I mean, it was very difficult to get this off. There was this kind of handle here, plastic handle that you needed to push down in order to kind of slide it out, but yeah, it was very annoying to do so, and you always have the impression that you will end up breaking something. So yeah, not a big fan. But finally, in the end, we got everything removed. So the only thing that was left was the motherboard here, held into place with a couple of screws and also a little bit of plastic here, which kind of holds it in place. So I needed to remove that as well. But with that removed, we were able to get the motherboard or the back plate off of the case, which also holds the serial and the parallel ports. And here we have it, all of the components that make up our little Nokia desktop PC. From the back plane here with the 6 ISA slots, to the logic board containing our CPU, some expansion cards like the video card, we've got the hard drive, we've got the fan, we've got the power supply, and the case here. So let's take a look at all of these individual components. And we'll start with this kind of oddly shaped power supply with the special connector here. Now, I wasn't able to open the thing because there weren't any screws here that would allow me to get inside easily. So the only thing I did here was use my compressor to kind of blow the dust out. Fortunately, the power supply is still working, but unfortunately, this is the only internal view that I can give you at the moment. So this was created in the beginning of 1991, and other than that, it's made in Italy, made specifically for Nokia. We have the power button here, but other than that, I don't really have a lot of information on it. Now the core components are located on this little board here, including the 8 megabytes of memory that this PC came with. So these are standard 30-pin SIM modules. We have 8 of them, a variety of different brands, giving a total memory count of 8 megabytes. We also have the CPU, which is the Intel 386SX 20 megahertz, pretty low spec 386 CPU. We have an optional Math GoPro here, which isn't present. We have the BIOS version here, version 3.06 from Nokia. We have a speaker. We have a battery here, which is used to keep track of the date, the time, and the CMOS settings. A lithium battery, hasn't leaked, held into place with 2 screws, so 3.6 volts. So this can be probably be replaced with a coin cell battery. We also have a fuse on the board, 2.5 amps, 250 volts. The chipset is provided by Texas Instruments, this TACT-A3443 chip. We also have a keyboard and mouse controller on the board for the 2 PS2 ports here for the keyboard and the mouse. All in all, a nice little board here, and something you don't come across all that often in personal computers. Moving on to the video card, and we have this 16-bit, what appears to be dual head ISA card from Paradise 88 chip, the PVGA1A chip. I didn't find a whole lot of information on this thing. There are a couple of jumpers here to configure the various outputs. I'm guessing this has about 256 kilobytes of RAM, but I couldn't really find a whole lot about this. So this is the NVGA2 card. This is specifically created by Nokia or for Nokia, but like I said, I didn't really find a whole lot of information on this card. It does have the Nokia BIOS here on the card. The main GPU chipset is provided by Paradise, the PVGA1A. There are a bunch of crystals here on the card as well, and also a couple of jumpers. 256 kilobytes of RAM. And Nokia branded the NVGA2 graphics card. And the final card that we have here is the RTX 10E, which appears to be a game adapter or joystick adapter card. Really strange to see in a PC like this. We also have the backplane, obviously. So here we have the connector for the power supply, which is mounted pretty high. I thought that this was a cooling element at first, but it appears to be the power supply connector. On this board we have 3 connectors, 2 serial ports and a parallel port. All 3 of them are provided by this VLSI chip here. We also have an integrated floppy controller and IDE hard drive controller. Floppy drive controller is provided by this Intel chip. I'm not really sure if this is also providing the IDE hard drive interface, but I couldn't find another chip. Now the power supply cables are soldered onto this board, so there is no connector, so yeah, need to be a little bit careful with that. And of course we also get the 6 16-bit ISA slots. And that about wraps it up in terms of the hardware sides of things. So I really hope you've enjoyed this little tour of the Alfaskop desktop M336SX, a small little desktop machine from Nokia, a 386 business-oriented machine. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. If you like this type of retro content, please consider looking at some of my other videos and consider subscribing, and I hope to see you guys soon. Bye bye.